Architects love to get new projects to work on. New challenges, exciting times. But with new projects comes the real challenge of coming up with new and exciting ideas. So, architects and designers, that's probably us, use all sorts of clever ways to generate out-of-the-box ideas. Most of the times when these ideas are being generated, it is taken up as an act of subconscious activity. However, we can train our minds to come up with these out-of-the-box ideas in a more predictable fashion. Time to take you guys through some of those techniques. Several ways that we can generate new and interesting ideas for new projects. Bear in mind that not every new idea that comes into our mind is intentional, as intuition plays a very important role in design. Probably we can make a video on that later. But we can try to formalize our approach towards idea generation to make sure that our idea making machinery works like a well-oiled machine every single time. These techniques just don't refer to architecture alone, but are applicable across the board in other disciplines as well, like furniture design, logo, graphics, layouts. So for this video, we'll discuss two of the most important techniques that have worked well with our workflow for generating new design ideas. Number one, mind mapping. Mind mapping is a simple but very powerful technique. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with the name at least. Think of it as getting all the information about the project in and out of your brain at the same time on a piece of paper. You create notes on a piece of paper and then you connect those notes to form diagrams. Those diagrams clearly organize all the information in a tangible way. An important thing to understand with mind maps is that we start with a central idea in the middle. The branches off in other ideas, those secondary ideas, and then they have twigs or tertiary ideas. So there's a clear hierarchy of information associated with mind maps. But this is how we like to use it. I generally start off with putting keywords or attributes associated with my project on a piece of paper. So as I go along, I try to find connections between the different words by adding more words to my collection. The one that I'm putting neatly on the side, as you can see. Slowly, I try to connect the different associations. A diagram starts to emerge. I keep refining and redrawing till I have a relatively complex looking map with a clear distinction between the major and the minor ideas. I can then start to attack individual branches and resolve my design process for that particular project. Makes sense? You can keep refining it as you go along. Mind mapping was apparently developed by Tony Buzan in his book Use Your Head. How ironic. It's on the list of books that I have to check out. If you're into mind maps, I advise you to go and have a look at the book. Alright, so you've seen how we create mind maps on a piece of paper. I sometimes like to use an online free tool called Coggle, COOGLE.IT. It's a very, very interesting way of doing the same thing, but on your screen. Have a look. Okay, the second technique that we use is called lateral thinking. So popular author, I'm sure you've heard of him, Edward de Bono of the 7 Thinking Hats fame, came up with the model of creative thinking. According to him, there are two types of creative thinking. Listen to this, it's very interesting. Number one is vertical thinking, where you get to solutions through a logical step-by-step process. It's sequential and it's more logical. Or number two is lateral thinking, what we're interested in, which is basically finding new perspectives to address challenges indirectly via reasoning through disruptive thinking. Sounds quite a mouthful. Let me explain. So instead of vertical thinking where we were forming logical connections or moving in a linear way, lateral thinking is more of an ad hoc process where you can think out of the box and disrupt thinking patterns. So there are many ways that you can apply lateral thinking in your work process, but some of the techniques that work really well for us are the following. Number one, thinking in alternatives, or looking at the same thing and trying to find alternatives. So for example, looking at an opening in the wall and trying to find alternative ways to look at it. The obvious one that comes to mind is a window or a door, and a not so obvious one is let's say we close it and we create a niche, and so the window becomes a niche. But an alternative could be a portal into the other world, a courtyard. Yeah, Sounds crazy, but it helps to break normal thinking patterns, and then we can come up with something that is totally out of the world. This leads us to the second technique, changing focus. We can change focus by deliberately forcing our mind to change the focus. For example, if you're trying to find a design solution for a retail store, we can stop thinking retail and perhaps try to force ourselves to look at another aspect of retail. For example, lighting. By changing the complete focus of our thinking from retail to lighting, we are forcing our mind to totally disassociate itself from the main problem, and then finding new solutions to the new word that we've just put into the mix. And then we start to think of how light can play a very important role in the space that we're designing, for example. Makes sense? So it yields really interesting ideas, often finding its way back to the original problem, which was retail in our example. So you always get attracted to the main problem in the end, after you're done toying with other interesting alternatives. The third interesting technique that we use is the random entry method. This is really, really interesting, simple but really powerful. We will use unconnected words to build something new. So in the last example, we changed focus by thinking about an alternative, but within the same parameters, more or less, as lighting is more or less part of retail, right? But random entry method is crazier than that. In this method, we like to create a list of words, which is sort of associated with the project. For example, we'll create a list of materials that we'll use. So we have metal, wood, glass, and concrete. That's pretty okay, right? So now let's try to throw in a random entry into the mix and see how things can change very quickly. So you have metal, wood, glass, goat, and concrete. A goat into this mix changes everything. What comes to your mind when you think about a goat in the mix? In my head, I start to think about different things. I start to think about mountains. If it's a mountain goat, I start to think about a beard like mine. I start to think about the sound of goats. The mind starts going absolutely crazy. By throwing in a random word can actually change everything completely. How are you approaching the problem? In a similar way, we can create lists of things associated with the project and then start throwing these random things into it and start to see where it takes you. So generally, all these techniques that we just spoke about are used in our design approach, but in an organized manner. So in our example, we were thinking of a retail store. Then we thought of creating a portal into another world that was connected to a space made up of light with mountain goats everywhere. That's crazy. But you can rationalize this as you go along. This is where synthesis comes in, but that's another topic altogether. So all of these techniques that we discussed can be used and practiced, and the more you practice, the better you become at it. Since most of these connections happen within your head, one often tends to attribute new ideas to subconscious activities or heavenly ideas. But wherever you think about concepts, you need to synthesize all of this into a proper design workflow in order to get to good design solutions or tangible solutions. Anyhow, there are countless ways that you can generate new and interesting ideas, but that's my time.